All right, so here's our choices. The dollar can collapse, the economy can collapse, the US can cease to be the global reserve currency, or we can go to nuclear war. Pick one. We can man up and we can pay our debts, or we can fight about it instead and likely take down the planet with us. I'm just saying, I'm opting for the first option because the first option is included in the second option. I'm pretty sure a byproduct of nuclear war is a dollar collapse anyway, so the smart thing to do in this case would be to pay our debts, but that's not what we're going to do, and we're going to find out in the next 72 hours what our genius leaders have concocted for their next move in the great East versus West 21st century conflict. My friends, the upcoming summit at Vilnius could lead to the precipitous increase in tensions between Russia and NATO, or it could just be a continuation of what we've already seen, a protracted incremental upping of the ante in terms of the conventional munitions that we provide the Ukrainians to prosecute their cause. What will it be? Let me know in the comment section below. Do you think that we're going to get really stupid and we're going to offer the Ukrainians an immediate pathway, a session into the NATO alliance, or are we going to give them security guarantees? What the hell is a security guarantee anyways? There's really three options as to what's going to come out of this summit in Vilnius. One, I don't think is really that relevant. I don't think it's going to happen, is that we're going to do nothing. We're not going to offer the Ukrainians anything more. We've seen that for whatever reason, we're very, very heavily invested in this conflict, and we're not going to be fundamentally changing our position in that regard. Number two, I think is probably the most likely, is security guarantees. But is number two different from number three, which is, of course, a pathway towards membership in the alliance, an immediate pathway? Because remember, 22 out of 31 NATO countries are calling for the immediate integration of Ukraine into the NATO alliance. Of course, that means the invocation of Article 5, the immediate invocation of Article 5. Will they use this? Here's a question for you. We're going to talk about why security guarantee and that whole semantic is very, very misleading, and why it's not much different than designating Ukraine a fully fledged member anyways. But what was I going to say? Okay, so if Ukraine is brought into the NATO alliance, are they going to use that as a threat to the Russians? Are they using it as a threat to say that we will bring Ukraine into the alliance and thus it'll bring us to the brink of nuclear war? And this is where we get into the game of chicken, because they could potentially threaten to immediately bring Ukraine into the conflict. That would, of course, necessitate that all of those 31 and really 32, and if you include the Ukraine, 33 countries immediately go to war with the Russians. It effectively would be a declaration of war, and boy, if you think we're at DEFCON 2 or 3 already, you ain't seen nothing yet. Those emergency action messages are going to be popping off the charts. Now, as far as security guarantees go, the way I see it is this. A security guarantee, what does that even really mean? Anytime you use the words guarantee, that's a pretty big commitment. Because you are saying that on no uncertain terms are we going to allow your government to be toppled. We are going to support you until the end. We will provide you a guarantee of your security, which is very akin to a no-fly zone without the no-fly zone in a lot of ways. Effectively, what it amounts to is that NATO is not going to put boots on the ground, but they're going to do every single thing but. And at some point, of course, then you are clearly a vassal, a proxy of the NATO alliance, and it's undeniable at that point, once you've given security guarantees, that you're effectively at war with the Russians. Now, Russia is not stupid. They already know they're at war with NATO, but they're trying to play it smart because they understand it's a war of attrition. Okay, but a security guarantee, if you look at other examples of countries who have security guarantees from the United States, well, the Israelis are one of them, and they have a pretty sweet deal there. They get money and weapons every year. They don't have to account for how many nuclear weapons they have. They have very close ties between the Mossad and the CIA, and there's all kinds of shady stuff, and they basically apparently can get away with pretty much anything they want. Let's face it. So is a security guarantee then even more escalatory than Ukraine becoming an immediate, fully fledged member of NATO? It's a serious question to think about, but in the next 72 hours, I'm just glad that we're going to finally know, or we're going to have some de jure understanding of what actions NATO is about to take, because I think this is going to be pivotal. If it isn't, then I guess we're just going to continue on ambiguously, not knowing how this thing is going to play out. I mean, they're sending cluster munitions, which is a sign of desperation. Biden had another parapraxis, another Freudian slip today in front of reporters, where he basically said, look, we're out of ammo, so we got to start using the more toxic stuff. And this has always been one of my concerns, is that as both sides run out of ammunition, and when the concern was that the Russians were running out of conventional weapons, that should have been a red flag for the West. See, you know that they knew they were bullshitting about that, because if they really believed that, they would be worried about the Russians looking over at their huge stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons that, of course, you wouldn't have to use if you had a lot of conventional cruise missiles and all the other fancy hypersonic conventional weapons. Why would you ever need to utilize the nuclear weapons? It's when countries start running low on all of the stuff which is in line with all of the Geneva Conventions and whatnots around the world, that they got to start looking elsewhere, okay? And it's amazing to me that you still have these maximalists like Lindsey Graham, day after day, raising the bar. Like, what is this guy's thing? I almost wonder if him and Medvedev are really just playing the same role in different countries. In fact, I propose that we put Dmitry Medvedev, you know, the guy, the former president of Russia, who every other day is threatening nuclear Armageddon. And yes, he just threatened nuclear Armageddon again today. He has, well, we'll talk a bit about that in a minute, but they're both the same, because I just think we should put them both in a boxing ring, and to the victor go the spoils. We should just settle everything like YouTubers settle beef. Put Medvedev and Lindsey Graham in a boxing ring, give one some whiskey and one some vodka, and let's just see what happens. Or we could have a drinking contest. Even better, because I know both of those guys have a drinking problem, all right? Anyways, all jokes aside, Lindsey Graham is actually calling for Ukraine to become a member of NATO. And he's not the only one. Rishi Sunak, former Prime Minister Liz Truss, Ben Wallace, the Defense Minister of the UK, as well as many others, very vocal and vociferously calling for the inclusion of Ukraine immediately into NATO. Now, some people are saying that this is madness. And indeed, if you believe the way things are supposed to play out, i.e. the invocation of Article 5, and we're all at DEFCON 2, in a permanent state of DEFCON 2, if not DEFCON 1, then yeah, you're right. It's absolutely insane. And Lindsey Graham is most definitely insane. But it seems like what they're doing is kind of a bluff. And it's a game of chicken. It's saying that we could, at any given time, we could just, override the rules. And now that you even have Turkey calling for Ukraine to be included into NATO, isn't that a slap to the face of the Russians? Boy, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. But you got to think, is it just a bluff? Are they just pushing that as a threat to the Russians, that at any time we could consider Ukraine a member of NATO, and right when we sign on the dotted line, of course, that means that we have to come to their aid. Now, that all depends on what territory we want to recognize as being Ukrainian territory. It could just be that the deal is that, okay, Ukraine, you can become a member of NATO, but those 4 annexed territories in Crimea, we're not going to invoke Article 5 for that. But if the Russians do further offenses, we're still going to help you try to get back that territory, but we're not actually going to call for the invocation of Article 5 and thus bring our own troops in there unless Russia continues in its offensive. Does Russia care? Does Russia want Ukraine? Well, let's take a look at this chart here. The areas that Russia currently controls are among the most resource-rich areas. Let's actually take a look at another map here. This is a great example, okay? Level of concentration of mineral resources. The most fertile, the most industrially and materially rich land is land that Russia already controls. We're talking about tens of trillions of dollars of resources and natural gas that Europe needs. This breadbasket, this place which is endowed with so much resource wealth, and ain't it the truth that countries like this who have so much resource wealth are always in a state of conflict and corruption? It's no surprise. But take a look at the map. The Russians control it all, man. I mean, the majority, like this whole area, these lighter colors here, that's where the level of concentration of resource wealth is incredibly low. There's still fertile land and whatnot, but the majority of all of the resources, the mines, the industry, the gold, the gas, the oil, the salt mines, the potash, just resource dense. They already control it. So how is Ukraine ever going to pay the debts? It makes you wonder what the real purpose of this conflict really is, and why you have people writing articles like this at The Guardian saying that defeat of Ukraine would be a global disaster. Why? Because the US dollar would collapse? Okay. Of course the US dollar is going to collapse. We have to pay our debts at some point. We have to be big boys. We have to take responsibility for the mess we made. NATO must finally step in to stop Russia. Do you think Russia really wants to go further? I mean, they may, because quite frankly, they're probably going to realize at some point, you know what? NATO's a bunch of pussies, and we're kicking their ass. We're literally kicking their ass. We have a bigger military than pretty much most of the NATO countries combined when you factor in all the tanks we have. And even if the NATO countries had a 5 to 10 times larger collective military, it's not as interoperable as our own. This is why Germany was able to conquer Europe with 3,500 tanks in World War II. The Russians, at least as far as we know, have lost maybe, the worst case estimate from the Russian perspective is around 2,000 tanks. And I think the Ukrainians estimate it to be around 1,600 tanks. So realistically, maybe they lost half of that, of their 20,000 tanks. Okay? So it's possible that the Russians say, you know, we didn't want to go all the way to Germany before, but now we're realizing that shit, you guys are a bunch of pussies, so we're going to continue further. You don't even want to, you're not even willing to put your troops on the ground. I mean, you got Turkey. Okay, so Turkey, triple entente slap in the face. They sent on the same day, this is what they did. They supported Ukraine's immediate accession into NATO. Okay, and this is Erdogan is supposed to be Putin's buddy. And unless they're playing some kind of weird game of double cross, 4D, double agent 4D chess, I don't know, but it certainly doesn't look too good. You know, it's like a friend that keeps on giving by stabbing you in the back repeatedly. So this is what Erdogan did. He supports Ukraine in its current form, I'm guessing, or maybe that includes the annexed territories in Crimea. I don't know. He supports them going into NATO immediately. He also supports, or he allowed the release of 5 Azov battalion commanders who all look to be in very good shape. In fact, it looked like they just came from a resort. It didn't look like these guys were interned in any way which was bad. You know, like it didn't look like it was a negative experience at all. The state of them, unlike some of the POWs we've seen that are completely gaunt and devoid of any body fat. And they're also going to be sending some self-propelled guns, self-propelled artillery. So did Turkey just turn on the Russians is the question. And that's very pivotal because Turkey and the Russians were supposed to have this deal for natural gas. You see, there's all kinds of natural gas in Ukraine, tons of natural gas. Look at all this natural gas in the Black Sea. Maybe Turkey's thinking, hey, we're still in the crossroads. You know, it would still be our country that was likely where a lot of the pipelines are built in order to send this natural gas into Europe. they're playing both sides of the fence because they realize that, well, if NATO is somehow successful, which it doesn't appear as they're going to be unless they do a little Forty chess of their own and cross over the river with their armies, we're going to be at the behest of them. So we might as well kind of play both sides of the fence now. So is the whole Turk Stream, is the whole Turkey as the gas hub of Europe? And remember, Turkey is in a very unique situation. They're one of the only countries in the world, they're the only country in the world that has US nukes and has the Russians' most advanced missile defense system, or one of the most advanced, the S-400 missile defense system. Now, this has been a point of contention, as far as I know, between the Americans and the Turks. But they've continued to have both of those things. It's seen as strategically imbalanced or whatever. So we still don't know what the goal of this is. Maybe Russia, just at this point, is okay with Ukraine joining NATO as the rump state, minus the annexed territories. And maybe, Turkey knows that these howitzers or whatever they're sending are just going to be blown to smithereens. And maybe the whole Azov guys, maybe there's some 4D chess there. I heard an interesting explanation for why Zelensky's still alive. And it's that it would be harder for them to build up a new network of intelligence and surveillance apparatus in and around another actor that they don't know. I guess it's that old saying, better the devil you know than the one you don't, or whatever, however that saying goes. But if they were to take him out, then they would have the problem of obviously having to build up a whole network around somebody else. And of course they don't know. And Zelensky is an actor, guys. I mean, this guy is a legit actor. That's important to remember at all times, that I really truly don't believe that he is the one calling the shots in the very least, which is why I don't get on the guy's case too often, because if you ask me, he's more of a hostage in this situation, it appears, if you know what I'm saying. I was going to say something, but I'm not going to say that because we're already close to cancellation, or however close we are, and I don't want to give him any more ammunition. But all I can say is that this is what we're looking at. Yeah, we got, the 33 and NATO, which resembles a swastika, and it resembles a Baphomet, a satanic horn symbol. And I'm not even a conspiracy guy, but I mean, this is what we're looking at. Nothing even surprises me anymore, man. Nothing surprises me anymore. This is the collapse of Western civilization. It's all imploding. And it's just a joke at this point. Everything that they're proposing in the culture war, it's all just a joke to me. It's reached absurd levels where you can have a symbol like this and nobody says anything about it. Oh man, what's the point? What's the point of even doing this? Why am I holding a shovel? You're probably wondering, well, as some of you know, we have a store, CanadianPreparedness.com, where we only send the best gear. And look at this, I can spin this thing around. Check this out. The reason why I can do that is because there's a glass breaking tool on the bottom. A lot of these survival multi-tool shovels are very cheaply made. We've done extensive reviews on this one. It's far from it. It has all kinds of tools inside, a knife. You can use it as a spear. You can use it as a saw. And the tools are actually of very premium quality. It's good steel as far as you usually get on these things. And it's just a formidable apocalypse weapon. If I had one shovel for the apocalypse, that's going to be the one that we get. And I also want to tell you guys, we're having a deal on Silky products because I was able to broker a deal with the distributor. If you don't know, Silky has had to raise their prices by like 35%, probably even more than that, in the past couple years as a result of everything that went on. And we were able to get a discount from the distributor. So we're going to pass those savings on to you guys. So we're going to be doing a 15% off. Typically we have our 10% off for our viewers, but you get an additional 10% off of Silky products. And the reason why I'm such an advocate for Silky products is that this one I've actually had for 10 years. They cut through wood like butter. There's a small bit of surface rust, and the only reason why there's a bit of surface rust on this one is because I use it in the winter and I'm very lazy. I don't take care of my gear, admittedly, and there's snow on it, and then I fold it back in. It's actually mostly corrosion resistant, far more corrosion resistant than any other saw on the market. It's nickel plated. It's got impulse hardened teeth. It cuts through wood like butter. Barely ever needs sharpening. Eventually it will, but I mean, you need something like this if you're talking about off-grid, because chainsaws are not going to be an option for three main reasons. One, they're too loud. They draw too much attention. Two, they have a lot of moving parts. And three, you need gasoline. If you don't have gasoline, you're pretty much SOL. Okay, so go and support the channel. That's the best way to support it. You know, we made a video the other day. I thought it was kind of cool. I mean, maybe it was a little bit cringy, but you know, we put a lot of work into these videos. Like, we have a team of like graphics artists, and we do all these cool videos. These are the videos I love to do, man. Unfortunately, we might be pigeonholing ourselves into this daily dose of doom and gloom things. I don't really know what we're going to do on the channel, because, you know, this type of content, it really costs us a lot of money to make these kind of videos. As much as I love doing them, there just doesn't seem to be the interest in these types of things. But I mean, you never know. Maybe the YouTube algorithm just has to catch on. But I thought it was a fun video. We're going to keep doing videos like this, don't get me wrong, because you gotta keep doing the thing. You know, I mean, you can't just be talk. I know a lot of people just want to hear me talk about how shitty everything is in the world, but you actually have to pair that with taking some kind of action, even if it's just, you know, going to the gun range, or, you know, just dabbling in gardening, or, you know, taking a first aid course. Just something. Do something, because if you're serious about this, if you actually do think that the shit's hitting the fan, then you gotta do something to prepare for it. Otherwise, it's just masturbation, right? Mental masturbation. Now, what you're seeing behind me here is the fire smoke map. Believe it or not, the wildfire season has only really just started. Yes, you heard correct. It's really only started. The fires in Canada typically, I'm not talking about peaking. I'm talking about they usually don't really start until July, especially in British Columbia. And just the other day, we had a thunderstorm pass through there, which was a low precipitation thunderstorm, lots of lightning. Started a lot of fires. We have higher than average temperatures out there on the West Coast right now. So that is fueling a whole new set of conflagrations out there in the West. So it's smoky as hell out here today in Saskatoon, where I'm from. And I have a sneaking suspicion that you down in the South are going to get a good blast of smoke as well. What else do we have to talk about today? We talked a little bit about Lindsey Graham. Did we talk about cluster bombs and why there's such an escalation? Well, I briefly talked about them in the other day's video, but I mean, it's going to allow them to do a lot more damage on the front line in terms of Russia's defenses, I'm presuming, because they're not going to have to be as targeted. And they're saying that the reason why they're sending these there is because they're running out of ammunition. So at least that's the parapraxis that Biden had, the Freudian slip that he had today, when he basically told a bunch of reporters that, hey, we're running low on ammo, so we got to send out the cluster ammunition. The problem is that 2% of the little bomblets that you're seeing here, they don't detonate, okay? And that's problematic, because that means that little kids that are playing later on, a few years down the road, if this is in a radiated wasteland at that time, are going to come across one of these bomblets. They're going to pick it up and it's going to explode. And that's how it's going to go. So 2% is a lot, considering I don't know how many of these little bomblets are in each one. I'm presuming hundreds in each one. So that's not good, but it's going to intensify the conflict and possibly increase Ukraine's capability with this counteroffensive. Now, they're starting to talk it up as if Ukraine cannot fully commit to the counteroffensive until they get fighter jets, until they get warplanes, until they're able to match the Air Force capabilities that Russia has to bring to bear. And that could mean that, you know, this counteroffensive doesn't really reach its pinnacle until later on in the year. Maybe it's next year. They're really starting to talk as though this war is going to go on for a long time. And I don't think they care, because I think there's a lot at stake here. I think that, as demonstrated by this map, all the good stuff is what the Russians control. So I had somebody recently propose to me that the Russians don't really care about this area too much, that it's just meant to be a buffer zone. But when you have so much natural gas, and we're talking natural gas that rivals the Russians, who already have like 39 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. Ukraine's isn't that much, but it's getting close to that. Like it's around a third of that. So, and that's just in this one area, okay? So there's a huge amount of resource wealth. So I don't believe that they're willing to just go scorched earth on this area and they don't care about it at all. There's a reason why they're fighting so fiercely over this territory. And what you're seeing here is the potential occupation, is what people project the Russians will ultimately claim, because of course we know Odessa has a very large Russian population. So ultimately this is what they care about. And basically Ukraine will be a rump state that's cut off from the Black Sea and will be at the mercy of Poland and NATO in terms of its security and likely a lot of its economy as well. So I just do not see this ending anytime soon, and what it's likely going to amount to realistically if we don't see a nuclear accident, because we very well, every day that this goes on, I know it seems that we reach a new level of acclimation to the current state of things, and it appears as though, well, nothing bad is ever going to happen because it hasn't happened yet. But the more we mission creep into the conflict, and the more resources, the more materiel and surveillance and information that we provide the Ukrainians, the greater the likelihood that an accident happens. Okay? And because of that, the increase, the risk of an accident that could start a chain reaction of events that could take us to that strategic nuclear level increases day by day. So, I think that the most likely outcome at this point is protracted, long-winded, conventional warfare. The longer the war goes on, and the more we up the ante with things like cluster munitions and fighter jets, the greater the likelihood that we eventually get to that nuclear level. Okay, but what's likely going to happen is this is going to put huge recessionary pressures on the U.S. economy. Now, at the same time, the decoupling, there will be some benefits to the decoupling for the U.S. economy in terms of its reindustrialization. But it's going to be a long period where I think we're in that state of limbo, in that economic purgatory of sorts, where the economy is not really booming yet, but it's not really dooming either. It's just we're basically still kind of dependent on China. It almost seems like the only thing that creates the next, that lays the groundwork for the next economic boom is total war mobilization in all countries. That seems like that's where this is all heading. What else haven't I talked about today? So the Russians, Dmitry Medvedev himself, the guy who I think should have a boxing match with Lindsey Graham, he has said that he has accused the Ukrainians, and I probably should have put this at the forefront of the video, but he's accused the Ukrainians of attempting a missile strike on a Russian nuclear plant. Now this is very, very important. If this is true, that the Ukrainians used a Storm Shadow missile from the UK to target a Russian nuclear plant, first off, why the hell would you do that? If not to try to, in some way, provoke the Russians into doing something that is, more disproportionate, perhaps, and utilize some other sort of tactic which will be frowned upon and which will be the grounds that they perhaps need in Vilnius, because there still hasn't been any major incident that the Ukrainians can bring to Vilnius and say, look, this is why we need some sort of immediate commitment or beyond security guarantee to get in this conflict. Why would you do that It would make no sense to do that. The only reason why you would do something like that is to provoke the Russians. So he basically said that we should attack the nuclear facilities in Ukraine and Europe. Well, isn't that what Europe and Ukraine has been crying about all this time? Haven't they been saying that the Russians are about to attack our nuclear facilities? So there's something to this. And I know a lot of people think, oh, the nuclear situation, it's past now. It's never going to be, it's going to be a problem. I mean, they set all the pretexts in the same way they did the dam, only this one was way more hyped up. The rhetoric was way more intense. And it's only a matter of time, it seems, before this materializes into some event. Whether big or small, it's not going to matter. And maybe this whole Vilnius thing is not as significant as we think it is in terms of, NATO can make decisions whenever it chooses. It doesn't necessarily have to do it at the summit, but this could be the time when, people who are on the fence are convinced. It could be that unity of seeing all of the members there at once that kind of goes to their heads, and they make some really dumb decisions that bring us closer to the brink. But anyways, this is something that is not being talked about. It's according to a Telegram channel that Medvedev is basing this on. I'm assuming that being a high-ranking politician that he is, that he would have more intelligence to corroborate this, and he wouldn't make a point of talking about it unless there was some truth to it. So we're going to have to assume that there was at least a kernel of truth to this, and that the Russians are at least threatening to attack Ukrainian nuclear facilities. There's a lot of sensitive critical infrastructure in and around Ukraine, be it nuclear facilities as well as dams, especially the one in and around Kiev, which lead to a catastrophic destruction and loss of life. In his post, Medvedev wrote that if the attempted NATO missile attack on Smolensk nuclear power plant is confirmed, which is just east of Belarus, I do believe, then it is necessary to consider the scenario of a Russian strike on a South Ukraine nuclear power plant, Rivne nuclear power plant, where all the top high-ranking commanders just met recently, or the word I can't pronounce, nuclear power plant, as well as nuclear facilities in Eastern Europe. So they're starting to talk about decision-making centers and critical infrastructure and waging hybrid war on places in Europe. Now, the Ukraine Defense Ministry came out with this story today where they claim that the enemy carries on placing mines at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. They provide this diagram where they claim all of the mines. Now, these are, I can't remember the term for them, but they're like a claymore mine. They're for the purpose of taking out people. So they're not necessarily for the purpose of taking out heavy equipment. So would they even be powerful enough to have an effect on the nuclear facility, I think is the biggest question. But you can find all this information online if you just go to the Defense Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine website with their Iron Cross logo. I mean, God, this is clown world, man. Anyways, yeah, so that's what's going on there. So apparently they've mined the plant with mines that I don't think have the capability to actually cause any nuclear incident, but who knows? Who really knows at this point in time what the hell is going on? Gigantic swarm of grasshoppers flying into Utah is so large that it was picked up by weather radar. I don't know if I have an image of that. Yeah, here it is. This is the image on weather radar of locusts that were picked up, okay? So in Utah, you know what those people in Utah and Salt Lake City, you know what those Mormons are going to be thinking? They're going to be thinking, man, I got to start freeze-drying more food. Speaking of freeze dryers, that's where Harvest Right originates, is in good old Utah. NATO will announce a large-scale agreement to support Ukraine. Like I say, I don't think there's much difference between security guarantees and full accession into NATO. In fact, I think you can make the argument that it's almost better for both if they don't immediately are included into NATO. For one, it doesn't immediately put us at DEFCON 2, but also because it's very ambiguous in terms of what the commitment is going to be. You look at security guarantees with Israel, they got nuclear weapons, they got a blank check for support that nobody questions, that's bipartisan. And yeah, anyways, so here's Zelensky with his buddy. I mean, this is a man who is, this does not look like a man who, you know, is really in control of the situation. I mean, this looks like a guy who maybe they got some dirt on them or something, and they're like, you better do this, because if you don't, we're going to tell. What else we got going on here? I think that's about it for today, guys. I'm going to go enjoy the rest of the smoky day. And just remember, Russia has over 10,000 battle tanks left. And I believe the UK has like 50 that are operational. So something to think about. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit it up.